What is up, people? Dunna here, and today we're out in the Edmonton River Valley on a hot August day because we're going to be checking out the brand spanking new Sigma 85mm f1.4 DG/DN art lens. I've had the chance to shoot with this for a little while now, so we're going to talk about my experience, we're going to talk about the new size, the build, the image quality, and I'm going to show you some photos and videos so that you can get a good idea of whether something like this might make sense for you. One of the first questions I got when I reached out to you guys to see what you wanted to know about this was, why is Sigma putting out another 85mm f1.4 for Sony E-mount? They already have one out and it's pretty widely regarded as a great lens. According to my sources, this is actually going to be a direct replacement for that lens, and I think part of the reason for that is because that lens was gigantic. I watched a bunch of reviews for the previous lens and everybody said that was the biggest problem with it, is just that it was really, really big. I think mostly that had to do with the fact that it was adapted from an older model. This, on the other hand, is tiny. An 85mm focal length on a full frame is known to be the quintessential portrait lens. And 85mm was also made pretty popular in the YouTube videography world when it was called the King of B-roll by this up-and-comer Peter Malark? Petro Makinon? I can't remember what his name was. Regardless, a lot of people will tell you that you should have an 85 in your kit, but they come in a lot of different flavors. For example, this is a direct competitor to the Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master, which goes for $1,800 US, whereas this one is only $1,200 US. And I say only with an asterisk beside it because I know that that's still a lot of money. If you aren't willing to spend that kind of money, there are alternatives out there where you could look at something like an 85mm f1.8. The one from Sony is about $600 US, so it's half the price of this one, and it doesn't quite have all the bells and whistles, but it's still a great lens. This lens comes with Sigma's art label, which means that it's their top quality line, and it's available in Sony E-mount and L-mount. As of recording this video, you can pre-order this lens right now. I'll leave a link down in the description if you want to check that out. Like I said before, people really loved the older Sigma 85mm f1.4, but the one thing that people couldn't get over was the size and the weight of it. And that's something that they've seriously improved on this version. For example, the older model was 126mm or 4.97 inches long. It has an 86mm thread, so you know it's super thick, and it weighed 1,130 grams, so it was really heavy. The Sony G Master is quite a bit smaller than that in all of those categories. It's 107.5mm or 4.2 inches. It has an 82mm thread and it's only 820 grams. But this new Sigma 85mm f1.4 is even smaller than the G Master, coming in at 94mm or 3.7 inches with a 77mm thread, and it's only 640 grams. So the world of professional 85mm super fast portrait lenses just got a whole lot more portable. As you would expect from any Sigma art lens, it's made with great materials, it's got great build quality, you can tell just from holding it. It's also got a dust and splash proof rating from Sigma. There's definitely a rubber gasket on the mount, so you got a little bit of weather sealing between the lens and the body. One of my favorite features that isn't necessary but is just kind of cool is the fact that they've added an aperture ring onto the lens so you can control it right from here. It goes from f1.4 up to f16, and then there's also this A mode so that you can actually control it from your camera if you prefer it that way. There's also this switch on the side that locks it, so if you accidentally bump it, it won't move out of the mode that you've got it in. So it doesn't lock it on the aperture number that you're set to, it just locks it between either manual mode or camera control mode. And as if that wasn't enough, they've also got a switch so you can de-click the aperture ring. So in the off position, you get nice smooth movements between your aperture, and in the on position, you get clicks that are 1/3 stop increments. Again, something that's not necessary for every situation, but is just kind of cool to have. What it allows you to do when you have it de-clicked is make smooth exposure pulls, so it's not stepping in those 1/3 stop increments. We got an autofocus toggle switch, and we've got an AFL or a custom button if you want. The focus ring feels fantastic on this lens. It's got that textured rubber that we know from a lot of Sigma lenses, and it has just a really great resistance to it. Personally, I found the manual focusing to be a little bit slow for me. It's not a linear system, so how fast you move this is going to affect how far the focusing is changing. And I found that it took me a lot of turning to get it to go where I needed it to. And then of course, as you can see, we've got a lens hood, and it's actually got a button on it that releases it. So it locks into place and you can't get it off until you press this button, which is a nice little touch. Now, let's talk about the image quality. Before I got into the nitty-gritty of trying to do any tests or anything like that, I did actually just go shoot with this lens for a couple of weeks, and I really enjoyed my experience. From what I could tell, the sharpness was great. I didn't run into any big vignetting problems or anything like that. I did notice that there was a bit of a pincushion distortion on it, and there isn't a Lightroom profile for this yet, but I'm sure it's coming really soon, and it was as easy as just moving one knob over in Lightroom. The bokeh on this lens is absolutely beautiful, which makes it a fantastic choice for the portraits that it's designed for. Photo autofocus was fantastic. I didn't have any problems with it, no hunting, nothing like that. It was basically right on the mark like you would expect of a Sony native lens too. I used face detect, I used eye detect, and I also used animal eye autofocus, and it worked fantastically even though it was a really dark situation. One thing that Sigma mentioned when I first got the lens was that there's a little bit of vignetting going on at the close focusing distance of 85 centimeters. They mentioned that this was a bit of a trade-off in order to get the size of the lens smaller. In my opinion, that's fine by me. But one of the reasons why I wanted to come out here today is because I wanted to find a nice brick wall where we could do some sharpness tests and see about that distortion problem. All right, so we've got our brick wall here. I've got my info up in the corner so you can see it. You can see that right now we're at f1.4, and I took shots at one stop increments on the aperture. So I've got 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, and 16. But before we get into comparing those, you can see right off the bat that we've got that pincushion distortion that I was talking about, where all of our straight lines are kind of curved inward here. And so it's a super easy fix, even though they don't have a profile for it quite yet. I'm sure it'll come to Lightroom soon. But if we go to lens corrections, all you gotta do is go from profile to manual, and we're going to crank this down until your lines look straight. I found like somewhere around kind of -9 I should say, and now our lines are looking nice and straight. So okay, so now looking at our different apertures, what I want to see is how sharp we are in the center and on the edges. So at f1.4, the center is looking super duper sharp. For whatever reason, this top left corner is sharper than the top right one. I might have been at a slight angle to the wall. Because we're shooting at f1.4, it is very, very touchy to making sure that things are the same distance when you're doing a test like this. This isn't the most scientific test in the world. Actually, the corners look pretty darn sharp still. Okay, so let's quickly do some comparisons. So we've got our f1.4 on the left-hand side, and we'll just compare going forward. So we've got f2 on the right-hand side. Now, center is already super sharp on the f1.4, so I don't think it's going to soften up as we go stop down more, and the f2 looks just fine. So let's go up to the top left corner here. So already this f2 is looking much nicer. It's even a little bit brighter, which might suggest a bit of vignetting going on. Let's see what happens if we go to the f2.8. It's definitely super sharp. This is f4, and it is quite sharp. It's nice. Top corner, f5.6. Yeah, we were basically corner to corner sharpness at f2. So f1.4 might be a little bit soft in the corners, but basically by the time that you hit f2, you're golden. The other thing that I wanted to check out was how this handled high contrast areas and shooting towards a light source, see what kind of flares we were going to get and what kind of ghosting or chromatic aberration. And in my opinion, I think it handled it really well. I'm literally shooting directly towards the sun, and the flares and stuff are really minimal. And if we look up here, we're seeing very, very little fringing. And in this clip, you can kind of see a little bit better with the movement, how that's going to look. Now, of course, personally, I'm both a photo and video shooter, so I also tested the capabilities for this lens in video mode. And again, I wanted to do it on kind of a practical level, so I decided to shoot a little sequence, but instead of doing something cliche YouTuber like a one-wheel sequence or anything like that, I thought I would do something completely unique, and I shot a sequence of me making coffee when it was way too hot for me to make coffee. Oh man, it is so hot. Just gonna script. What am I doing? It's gonna be so hot. Oh my God, it's so delicious, but it's so warm. I can't believe I'm doing this to myself. Why? Oh, thank you, coffee gods. Now, in that sequence, I did use a macro tube a couple of times because of the close focusing distance of 85 centimeters. Just wasn't quite close enough for me to get the shot that I wanted. It was about half and half manual focus and autofocus, and I didn't run into any real issues with the autofocus at all. It did a great job on face detect. I shot the whole thing on the A7 III, so I didn't have eye detect. And I only really ran into one issue where the autofocus kind of froze up on me completely. I did reach out to Sigma and showed them the problem that I was having, and they couldn't replicate it. It did feel like one of those things that was just a one-off issue. I haven't had that problem again since, and all I had to do to fix it was take the lens off and put it back on the camera. Maybe I need to clean the contacts on my camera or something along those lines. But I figured I'd mention it just in case. And as far as the sound of the autofocus motors, I haven't noticed them at all. They definitely haven't been loud enough to pick up in the microphone. I even used the internal microphones on my camera to shoot that sequence and couldn't hear the lens at all, and usually that's notorious for picking up lens noise. Okay, so final thoughts on the Sigma 85mm f1.4 lens. It's definitely a great lens. It's made for the professional portrait shooter, and it does a great job with that. But it's definitely not the most inexpensive lens either, coming in at $11.99. It's cheaper than the Sony G Master version of the same lens, but you're definitely paying for the high quality and all those professional bells and whistles. If you're looking for something a little bit more budget conscious, I definitely suggest checking out the Sony 85mm f1.8. or the equivalents from Viltrox or Samyang. From what I've seen, they all still do a pretty darn good job, and they cost about half as much as this one does. I absolutely love the size and weight of this thing. It feels great in the hands. They've done a fantastic job of making the 85-1.4 small, so it's a little bit more manageable. You can now actually toss this in your bag without it making too much of a difference to the weight. The image quality is fantastic, definitely deserving of that art label. I really enjoyed shooting with this lens. A lot of you wanted to know if I would recommend this for APS-C. I think the answer to that would be no. I think if you're looking for something that's that 85mm and a nice wide aperture, I would suggest going with the 56mm f1.4 from Sigma for APS-C cameras. You're gonna get about an 85mm f2 equivalent, and it is such a fantastic lens, and it's significantly less expensive. 85mm on APS-C ends up being kind of a weird equivalent, and I don't know that it would be a super useful focal length. But everybody's a little bit different. It still performed well on APS-C. I just don't know that it makes sense for most people. So if you're looking for a professional portrait lens or even an 85 for your video work, I would definitely recommend this lens if you've got the budget for it. But as always, I want to hear from you. Let me know what you thought of the 85mm from Sigma. Leave a comment down below, and on your way down there, hit that like button and subscribe, and hit the bell notification button so you don't miss out on future reviews and tutorials. Huge thank you to you guys for watching. Thanks to Sigma Canada for lending me this lens, and I'll see you next time.